Hello, welcome to Algebra 2. This is your first video. We're going to be talking about domain and range and how to write them in interval notation, set notation, as inequalities, and verbally, so just with words. So when we're talking about domain and range, we're talking about the set of all possible values of x and y. Domain is x, range is y. But you should remember, when you write it, you're always going to write it so that the domain is left to right, and the range is bottom to top. Okay, so it's left to right and bottom to top. So let's get into this with two different examples so that you have some variety in how to use this. Well, first, we have to deal with intervals. And you might not have dealt with intervals a lot before, but it's really a very simple way to write it. You always go from one number, a comma, and then the next number. And you signify included and not included with parentheses or brackets. If you have a bracket, the endpoint is included. So that's that blank right there. If it's parentheses, the endpoint is not included. So the only time it is not included is if we have an arrow going on forever and ever, like we have in this straight line, or if we have an open circle. That is the only way it is not included. So let's start. Let's start with this line, the x plus 2 line. Well, we said domain is left to right. So if we're going to the left, does it have an arrow? Does it end? It has an arrow. So we have negative infinity, because remember, when you go to the left or down, we have negatives. So we have negative infinity because it never stops. Now, if you go back over here, it says infinity always uses parentheses. So that gets a parentheses. Then we have a comma. Now we're going to go to the right. So as we go to the right, it has an arrow, right? There's an arrow right there. That means, again, we're not touching. So we have another infinity. But because it's to the right, that's the positive side. So it's just positive infinity. And again, infinity gets parentheses. The range, bottom to top. So let's look bottom. Well, whenever we go down on this graph, we're going down to the left, but it's still going down forever because there is nothing stopping it. So again, believe it or not, we have negative infinity, which gets a parentheses. Now we're going to go up. So if we go up, well, that also has an arrow right there. So again, in the same way that going to the right had an infinity, the up also has an infinity. And infinities always get parentheses. And there you go. You've found the domain and range of a straight line. So over here, in the blue, we have a strange little function, and it's not something that we normally deal with, but we have to be able to find the domain and range of that too. Now the straight line going through it, just ignore that, just look at the blue and the endpoints. So again, we're going left to right. Well, if we go to the left, it kind of stops there because of that. So that's the point we're looking at. Well, that point is actually at -5 because we're talking about x's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going from negative and 5. Now, the question is that a bracket or is that a parentheses? Well, does it stop? Is it closed? Or does it look like this thing over here and open? Well, that's closed. So we need to put a bracket. All right, so let's get rid of all of that, because now we're going to the right. So we started there, and now we're going to head that way. But if you look, we have an endpoint. It kind of stops, and that is at 1, 2. So we have -2, and that's open. That's physically open. It's an open circle. It's not filled in, which means that's the parentheses. And there you have the domain of that function, left to right. Now let's do the range. We're going to go bottom to top. So let's go as far down as we can. Ready, stop. Right there. So even though it's not a designated point, it is the lowest point on the graph, on the blue line, that we can get to. That makes it the bottom. Okay, and that is at 1, 2. So we're down at -2. It's not open, and it doesn't go on forever. That's how we know it's a bracket. It does not go on forever, and it's not an open circle right there. Now, let's go up. Aha, we have a highest point right there. So it's still the negative 5, 2, but now we're talking about the y. So we have a 2 there. So we're going to 2. Now, is that an open circle or a closed circle? It's closed, which means that is also a bracket. And that happens, and that's okay, right? You can have a domain with an open circle and a range that doesn't include that open circle necessarily, all right? Though at least in the way you write it. Now, let's continue and learn about inequalities. Now, inequalities, that's whenever you have the symbols like this, okay, where it's less than and greater than, and x and y are placed in the middle. Okay, if it does not have a line, the endpoint is not included. What do I mean by a line? I mean this, the or equal to. If it does have a line, the endpoint is included. So we can take what we just did and just write it differently. And it means the exact same thing. Now, if you're going from negative infinity to positive infinity because of our graph, our straight line right here, then it's actually what you're used to seeing as all real numbers. Okay, that's how you would write it as an inequality. But let's use a symbol instead. It just takes a little bit less time. We're not doing the written out answer right now, so we don't have to write it all out. So you draw a line, another line, and then an R. So the range is exactly the same because the domain and range are exactly the same in interval notation. So we also have that R, and that R just means all real numbers. It's just a shorthand. Now the domain, we already know it's going from negative 5 to negative 2. So let's put our negative 5 and our negative 2. We've already figured that out. The inequalities just go like this every time. And you've got that x in there. If it's in the middle, the inequalities have to go in the same direction. Okay, that's what happens. Now, with our negative 5, it was a bracket, which means it was included. And if it's included, now we have to have that line underneath. So we put the line. The negative 2 does not need a line because it was not included. It had a parentheses. To do the range, we do the same thing. We take our negative 2 and our positive 2. We've got our inequalities, but now we have a y because with range we're talking about y. Now both of those were closed, so they both get little lines. Now, whenever you're doing set notation, set builder notation is used to describe the properties of the set. Well, our set is x, or it's y, depending on whether you're doing domain or range. So for domain, the only difference between the set notation and the inequality notation is that we do a little brace. Those are braces. You don't have to do them perfectly, just attempt your best. And x. And this says that x is such that. So this little line means such that. So we're talking about x such that we have all real numbers. And then you're done. So now we're talking about range, is y, such that they're all real numbers. For the other one, we have x such that negative 5 less than or equal to x less than negative 2. And I just got that from what we did above. So we had domain negative 5 less than or equal to x is less than negative 2, and the one with the inequalities. And I just took that inequality and I put it in the brace. For range, we do the same thing. The only difference is that now we're talking about y. So we have y such that negative 2 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 2. Now, we have one more thing we have to know how to do, and that's discuss things verbally. Okay, with words. You have to be able to write, one, in complete sentences, despite the fact that you're in math class. No groaning. And two, you need to be able to write things in words and explain things aloud, so you have to know how to say things, including domain and range. So if you went up to a person and they didn't know that that symbol meant all real numbers, and you didn't know that that symbol meant all real numbers, you're not actually communicating anything because nobody understands it. So you have to be able to write all real numbers, because that is what that symbol means. For range, you actually have the same thing, all real numbers. Now, if we actually look at our picture, and we're going from left to right, we're talking about all of these x's. Okay, so for the domain, we're talking about where x is between -5 and -2. Okay, because it's between those two x values. So we're going to write that x is between, so x is between -5 and -2. Now, to say that it's only included when you have -5, because that's the closed one, right? That's the one with a line under it. You write inclusive of -5. That's it. Okay, so we know that x is between -5 and -2, and -5 is the only one that's included, so you write inclusive of 5. Now, for our range, they're both included. So we're still talking about y is between -2 and 2. But this time, because they're both included, you can just say inclusive, because that covers everything. Okay, you don't have to be specific. And that is it. That is domain and range.